it's not a fiat. It's actually got real value behind it. And so there's a real strong initiative being put forth by the World Gold Council right now. And we're hoping that within the next year, we will have a platform that will come out and allow digital gold to be traded freely and easily and rapidly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The advantages of gold is the fact that it is there isn't a regulatory body. It's a universal commodity that's widely accepted as that measure of value, as that store of value. And there is no, the IMF, of course, tends to be the main regulating authority in terms of asking for this information, but there's no forced requirement for members of the International Monetary Fund to actually deliver back that information in. It's a request, but it's not a requirement. And so most of the information that we pull at the World Gold Council does come from IMF filings. We of course have a division at the World Gold Council that does focus on providing education to central bankers, the actual people that work at these central banks, to try and educate them about the strengths and the benefits of having gold in those portfolios. So we do have good, strong relations with most of the central banks around the world from that perspective. But when it comes to the filings, it's generally we pull most of our information out of the IMF. The Russia-Ukraine, like the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and some of the responses back in terms of limiting Russia's access to SWIFT and sort of free currency trading and such like that has really caused a lot of the world to reconsider what the US dollar does represent. In simple words, the US dollar, some would say, has been weaponized through this process. And so you've got a number of countries around the world, Canada included, that of course hold substantive US dollar holdings in their central bank reserves in order to provide that stability. And I don't care whether you're friendly with the United States or not friendly or anywhere in the spectrum. Central bank reserves are the core value, the core backup for every country out there. And what you want with those reserves is you want to make sure that you maintain diversity and you want to limit risk. And I think what we're seeing here is that a lot of central banks around the world have watched what happened and are perhaps a little bit more nervous about the amount of US dollars that they've got in those central bank reserves. And they're now exploring the concept of truly building that stability. And this is what we know society has shown this continued. Gold is the constant store of value. It's abject of any type of political interference or influence. It's always provided that for society. It always will provide that for society. And I think that's what we're seeing is we're just seeing a lot of central bank movement where we're starting to question, should a lot of these central banks be so heavily weighted towards US dollar backed reserves? And perhaps it's time to start shifting into healthy, apolitical alternative, gold, something that can't be manipulated and can't be weaponized by any future governments. China and India are the two biggest consumers on an overall basis in terms of that's where most of the gold goes in today's world in trading. And so both India and China, India's got a very strong retail and jewelry trade, of course, and there is a lot of export out on that front. But with respect to China and India, even with the gold production in those countries, and specifically China, which does have healthy gold production in country, they are still a net consumer and net importer of gold. And so anything that's produced in the country doesn't leave. I can tell you that the World Gold Council has an initiative right now pushing down that path to digitalize gold. It's called the Gold 247, or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is what it stands for. Gold 247 initiative. And really what we're striving towards is to try and make gold readily accessible through digital tokens, through essentially, as I would say, I don't think there's actually been a real stablecoin invented out there yet, but I think that we may be able to create the first ever real stablecoin with real assets backing it. So the ultimate goal is to improve the accessibility, the transparency, the provenance, and the trust behind gold and moving gold around. And so we've got a pretty heavy initiative focused on trying to work with a broader group of the refiners, the banks, the traders, to come up with a system that is gold backed and allows us to move gold around quickly, freely, with confidence, with trust, and with transparency. Actually ultimately provide gold as an alternative to the US dollar. If you look around the world right now, the US dollar is by far the strongest currency. We're all looking at commodity prices and all sorts of ruining it. But if you start looking at perhaps the price of gold in, say, pounds or euros or other currencies around the world, it's actually doing okay. We've got an incredibly strong US dollar environment out there, and there's no real alternatives. And so I'm sure there's all sorts of groups. China definitely would love to come up with an alternative to the US dollar as being the strongest of the fiat currencies. We think it's time for gold to actually step up and become an alternative. It's not a fiat, it's actually got real value behind it. So there's a real strong initiative being put forth by the World Gold Council right now. And we're hoping that within the next year, we will have a platform that will come out and allow digital gold to be traded freely and easily and rapidly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I've got a daughter, she's 24 years old now, but several years ago she boasted to me about how much money she was making in the crypto space. But she also made a comment to me that really caught my eye. She said that because she's a geologist and she was actually out working in the field, and there was times when she was not connected, so to speak, and so she shifted all her money into what she called a stable coin. And when I started looking at what was being described as stable coins, they are anything but stable. They are not stable coins. They don't deserve the title. They don't deserve the name. And that's really what started the catalyst. Is shortly after that took on the chair of the World Gold Council, and we have a new CEO at the World Gold Council, David Tate, and he and I started banging heads together and came up with this, it's time to modernize how we trade gold. Trading gold hasn't changed for hundreds of years. And we've had a few modernizations in terms of the ETF being available. This is the next step in terms of making it easy and accessible to everyone. And having that provenance and that trust behind it is just such a necessary next step, and society really needs it right now. We're not going to limit the ability to own physical gold. This is just an option. This is accessible, but there's still going to be plenty of options for people to own hard physical gold. And in fact, I myself, I love having physical gold in hand. There's something strength, there's something of warmth that comes out of owning physical gold. And so we're not limiting the accessibility of gold. What we are is actually broadening it to a wider audience, to an audience that doesn't need the physical side, that is happy to have it on a digital world and a digital platform and being able to move it around easily. Ultimately, we hope to get to the point where you should be able to take that physical and exchange it into digital and back and forth as a currency, the same as a ready currency. And that's our ultimate objective, is to get it to the point where it is interchangeable from physical to digital and back and forth. But we're not restricting that access. And I fully understand the need for people to have that physical gold in hand. And that's not going to change. U.S. has dramatically more gold backing it right now in its central bank reserves. And so they've got a long ways to go, but I guarantee you that's an objective. What differentiates the US dollar with respect to other fiat currencies out there? Obviously, it's backed by the United States, one of the strongest countries in the world. But the other differentiating factor is the fact that it has so much gold. I find it a bit embarrassing being a Canadian that our Canadian central bank doesn't even have any gold in it, riding on the coattails of the United States. And I find it just embarrassing that we actually need to do that with our Canadian dollar. It's every country should really focus on having the capacity to stand on its own. And I think that's exactly what China's trying to do, and a lot of other jurisdictions around the world. I do think we are setting ourselves up, but the strength of the US dollar is not sustainable, especially to have it continuing to grow in strength. And so I do think we're setting ourselves up for an incredibly promising gold market over the next few years. I do think we are setting ourselves up, but the strength of the US dollar is not sustainable, especially to have it continuing to grow in strength. And so I do think we're setting ourselves up for an incredibly promising gold market over the next few years.